talk that matters. Johnny Vedmore on today's News Talk, TNT.
Welcome back to Johnny Vedmore Show on today's News Talk TNT. And my last guest up today on this penultimate show on the Johnny Vedmore Show is Karlyn Borysenko, who is a psychologist turned independent journalist who covers the radical revolutionary far left in America. You can find her streaming almost daily on YouTube, X, and Rumble, and you can access her written breakdowns explaining the left on her Substack. Karlyn, that's KARLYN.substack.com or on X at Dr. Karlyn B, Dr. Karlyn B. Thanks for coming on the Johnny Vedmore Show again. How are you?
Hey, thanks for having me again. I'm doing well.
I'm really happy that you've come back, and this is these are the last days of TNT, and people like yourself have been a welcome addition to the shows, of course. And I thank you for your appearance in the past and just for being yourself, the work you do. I really love it. Let's start off. What are the real goals and intentions of the Marxist left, do you think?
Yeah, the real goals and intentions are quite simple, actually. It's to abolish capitalism. Capitalism, they specifically define as private property ownership. And that's really important for people to know, because a lot of people might think, well, capitalism doesn't work out so well for people like me. There's crony capitalism, there's corrupt capitalism, and I don't like all that. And I agree with you, that's a problem. But what people need to know is that when the left says capitalism, what they're talking about is your ability to own a home, your ability to own land, your ability to own a private business. And one of the most scary things, Johnny, is that the left actually defines parental rights to raise your children the way you want to as a form of private property that will be abolished when they get their Marxist utopia. And so every time they say it takes a village to raise the children, they quite literally mean they want the children to belong to the village, not to the parents.
Yeah, you're right to own nothing and be happy. That's what their future is, and it looks like it's going well for them at the moment. At least they're telling us it's going well. At the same time, our streets are on fire, and people look like they are the saddest they've ever been in my whole life anyway. Do many of these young Marxists even know where their ideology derives from? Are they well educated in Marxism, or are they just kind of told what to believe by those who are just hanging around and causing trouble?
Well, it's a tricky question, right? Because at least in the United States, what's going on is the public school system has been completely captured in the United States since around about 2008, 2009, 2010. They were teaching it in public schools before that, but that's when it really became solidified. And it was really within almost pretty much every public school system in the United States. And what that means is the kids today that are doing the college protests on American college campuses, they have literally been taught this ideology since they were 5 years old across a variety of classes in public schools. And so I very much believe that the college students today are victims of this ideology. It's almost as though they've been indoctrinated into a cult, and they've had this content drip to them over time, and they don't know any differently because an opposing viewpoint has never been presented. Now, that's not to say that every student is going to get indoctrinated into a far left political ideology. Of course, your upbringing, your parents have a lot to do with it as well. But do they know what they're doing? They do know, but they have never actually considered the alternate point of view.
Yeah, and the alternate point of view may not be something that's on their timelines because they're so carefully curated, and the algorithms feed them the junk that they want to hear. So, I mean, that's one of the problems we have at the moment. Now, I see you're having a feud with a guy called James Lindsay, and you get a little smile on your face. You're enjoying that feud, I think. I like to have a feud or two here and there. I love it when you find someone who's your ideological opposite, or at least doesn't agree with you on something and acts atrociously. But thankfully, I don't have a clue who this James Lindsay character is. So fill us in on what's happening and what Lindsay represents.
Yeah, so James Lindsay is a very popular academic on the conservative right in the United States. Even though he's not a conservative, he's a liberal and an atheist. And he is the guy that's been propped up by basically all of conservative media and these conservative Inc., kind of like bought and paid for organizations to teach people about what the left is doing. And, there was a time when James Lindsay actually did a really good job. And I'll be the first to say he was very formative in my understanding of the left about 4 or 5 years ago. But since then, he's been kind of brought into this political machine where his job has become to sell a political narrative. Now, the thing of it is if you want to actually defeat the left, which I do want to defeat the left, I'm terrified of the left, you need to understand the enemy that you're fighting. And about probably 6 to 8 months ago, I realized that James Lindsay was lying to millions of people about what the left was actually doing in the United States. He was just selling them complete falsehoods in order to advance a conservative political narrative. And he was telling them things about, the way that James Lindsay conceives of queer Marxism, which is one of the areas that I focus on heavily, is he literally says, I'm not making this up, it is a Gnostic sex cult that is led by Oprah and the New World Order and the WEF and New Age spiritualists that is coming to steal your soul. And that sounds crazy, right? But I have people coming to me all the time saying, Karlyn, this is a Gnostic cult. And I'm like, no, this is not a Gnostic cult. This is a group of people that want to abolish capitalism and destroy our entire way of life. Can we please hinge back into reality? And so over the course of several months, I've been trying to get James to listen to this. Members of my community have been trying to get James to listen to this. We've been trying to show him primary source video because that's all I work from, Johnny. I infiltrate leftist trainings and I record them and then I show the video on the internet. And we've been trying to show him this and he has just been completely unwilling to look at it. And so now we are ramping it up a notch and we are demanding a public debate between me and James Lindsay where I am going to be able to show primary source video of what the left is actually saying. And James can talk about whatever Gnostic sex cult he wants to talk about. And then, you know what? The viewer can decide for themselves which they find more credible.
Oh, it'd be really interesting to get a panel together for that to be the moderators, because I know a few people who are experts in Gnostic cults, and they would be able to pick apart those bones, that's for sure. It's really interesting that people take that, or maybe it's infuriating. People take a stance and then they have a really hard time leaving that stance go because they've taken it. Or is it something more with James Lindsay? And that's really a follow-up question. Do you think this is James Lindsay just being obtuse, ignorant of other facts, just he's made his decision, he's made his bed, he's lying in it? Or is this he's purposely trying to mislead people?
I think it's a little bit of both, to be honest. I think there's definitely stubbornness. I think there's definitely like he's making the bed and he feels like he's backed into a corner now and he can't back out. I also do think James has a vested monetary interest in selling these ideas because places like Moms for Liberty, a huge organization in the United States, pay him to tell people that the goal of the left is to sexualize children. Places like Turning Point USA to pay him money to do the same thing. And it's like, I'm not saying that sexualization of children doesn't happen, and I'm not saying it's not an unimportant thing to pay attention to. Of course it's important. You want to protect kids from all of that. However, it is a teeny tiny sliver of what's going on the left. And far more important is this strategy to proactively abolish the gender binary, which the gender binary just means men and women. And what they're trying to do is utilize the public school system to convince kids that the gender binary does not exist, that everyone is some form of gender queer, gender fluid, a non-binary they, them. And that is a very purposeful attack, because if they can abolish the gender binary in the minds of young people, they're going to grow up believing that gender is not a real thing. That's going to have profound societal impacts, especially on the nuclear family, which is what the real target of queer Marxism is. It's to abolish the nuclear family because they believe that they cannot fully abolish a capitalist society and usher in Marxism until they abolish that. And so from my perspective, I'm like, we have to prioritize. And I understand that James likes this Gnostic cult narrative that he's being paid to sell people, but in reality, it's actually far worse. And there are millions of people right now that are being misinformed by him that are going to experience the impacts of that. Either if they have kids in public school, those kids are probably going to be fed gender ideology right under their nose. They're not going to understand it. Or the public schools are also a direct way that they're making attacks on parental rights to remove parental decision-making over their kids. The people deserve to be properly informed of what is driving all this and what is causing it. And right now, James Lindsay is not doing that.
Yeah, there's some interesting questions. Our first question coming from the chat is from my very good friend Marta. She's been a rock to me in hard times, and she always likes to define and to make sure that she's getting what people are saying right. And she's asking, are you saying that because they protested genocide, that is part of their indoctrination?
You know, that's actually an interesting thing. So no, I'm not saying that that's part of their indoctrination. This is kind of one of those weird things where the left has a very specific position on the Israel-Palestine issue, and they are absolutely not on Israel's side on the Israel-Palestine issue. There are a lot of other people who find what Israel to be doing to be morally reprehensible as well. That doesn't make you a leftist. It doesn't make you a queer Marxist. This is just one of those crossover issues that a lot of people care about. But what I will tell you is that leftists don't actually view the conflict between Israel and Palestine in terms of, you know, the Jewish state versus the Islamic state or about really liberating Palestinians. What they think is that Israel represents capitalism in this equation. That's why they call Israel the settler colonist. They believe that Israel came in and stole Palestinian land. This is called colonization or colonialism. And what they believe is that the Palestinians are in the glorious uprising against the evil capitalist oppressors to decolonize their land. And this is actually how it's conceptualized by the left in the United States on the campus protests. And again, I have them on video explicitly saying this, that this is actually, they perceive this to be a Marxist uprising. If you ask communists in the United States how they define intifada, they literally say they define it as a worldwide socialist revolution. So what I want people to hear is you can be on either side of the Israel-Palestine issue. I'm not going to place a judgment on that. But just because you are on the side of Palestine or you think what Israel is doing is wrong, that doesn't make you a leftist. And if you agree with the left on this issue, understand they probably interpret the situation differently than you do.
I agree with that. Some of the things I hear make me feel uncomfortable when I have to say, I go to these marches. I do some recording at times. You know, I like to do my auditing, be out with a camera. And I do think that if people if the majority of people there would talk to me, they would be very angry about the fact I won't agree with them 100%. And that sort of attitude is the attitude where I'm like, well, I agree with you objectively about stuff. I tried to be objective about stuff and agree with you if it's true and don't agree with you if it's not. And it does seem to be that if you don't agree with us on everything, then you're out of here and you're not one of us. And that one of us seems to be the sign that there's a leftist vibe. It's a political leaning more than it is an actual social movement. And Martin has asked, isn't Marxism and communism, or is Marxism and communism ubiquitous?
Is it ubiquitous?
Yeah.
I wouldn't say it's ubiquitous yet. I would say we're getting to the point where it's ubiquitous. I firmly believe, and I've laid out the timeline for this on my YouTube channel and on my Substack, I believe there's going to actually be a Marxist overthrow of the United States government within about 15 years in the United States. So I think we're actually getting there. There's certainly a lot of Marxist policies that are implemented in the United States, honestly, both by the Democrats and the Republicans. I mean, both of them are advancing socialism in their own way. But what I would say to people is that you always need to keep in mind that the ultimate goal of the left is to abolish all private property. So while we are still in a place where we can own private property, we can own our own home, we can have a private doctor with our private insurance, we can homeschool our kids, we can have private schooling, we do have parental rights over our kids, we do have freedom of speech, we do have individual liberties, then Marxism hasn't fully taken over yet, because the goal of the Marxists is very literally to abolish our Constitution. And so as long as that still exists, we still do have a fighting chance. And so people need to understand that if you just say that the Marxists have already won, well, they have, but we have time to fight back right now. So let's take advantage of that.
Yeah, most definitely. Let's take advantage of it. One last question to fill up the last minute that we got here. Do you think that gender ideology is simply an offshoot of political correctness?
Is it an offshoot of political correctness? I mean, I suppose so. I think political correctness is what makes people want to adhere to gender ideology because they don't want people to be offended and no one wants to make someone feel bad. But the fact of the matter is people need to understand is that they are literally creating kind of like a fantasy world that doesn't exist around gender where they are denying biological reality. And one thing that I will tell people is what will lead to Marxists winning in the United States is if the gender binary falls. Listen, not all women have to adhere to a feminine stereotype. Not all men have to adhere to a masculine stereotype. That doesn't mean you're trans. That doesn't mean you're non-binary. That just means you're a human being and you're more complicated than that. And what they want to do is they want to say, if you are perfectly male or perfectly female, then you are non-binary or trans or any of these things. That's just wrong. If the gender binary falls in America, capitalism will fall in America. And so we need to protect it at all costs.
Karlyn, you are a force to be reckoned with. Thanks for coming on the show today. Really appreciate it. Let's not make this the last time that we have a conversation, all right?
Absolutely. Thank you, Johnny. And best of luck to you. Looking forward to keeping in touch.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it too. And thanks to everybody for joining me on another day on the Johnny Vedmore Show. Thanks to my guest today, Tony Kinnett, Dr. Ben Tapper, Brandon Weishut, and of course, Karlyn Borysenko, who I think is a wonderful lady doing wonderful stuff.